All right, everybody. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started, knowing that a couple folks may join us later as well, sort of throughout the morning. But thanks, everybody, for joining us for our, I think it's ninth now, I'm beginning to lose count, ninth, thanks, Ashley, nonprofit listening session via Zoom. And we're excited today to be focusing on collaboration, and particularly how collaboration is happening in this sort of virtual environment. So Ashley, share your screen real quick so we can go through kind of a couple slides and overview, and go ahead to the first one with all our lovely panelists. So today we are going to have kind of a panel discussion of many wonderful folks that some of you probably already know, who have been involved in collaboration in one way or another for a long time and bring a lot of different perspectives to the table. So Jeff Dinger with Giles County, who spearheads the amazing Focus program, and he can give us an overview of that. Many of you know the great work happening in Giles between the local government, social service agencies of all kinds to support more vulnerable communities. And it's been particularly impressive during COVID. Tina King, Executive Director of the Nrb Agency on Aging, which has done some fantastic partnerships during COVID, for example, to provide meals to vulnerable seniors to keep in touch with clients, but also being very involved with work around aging in place and many other collaborations. Kim Thomason, the Western Regional Manager for Child Care Aware, doing some wonderful support and advocacy work around child care and early education as so all times, but particularly during COVID. And she has been collaborating with a variety of different organizations, not just here in the NRB with groups like First Steps, but also across the western part of the state with a lot of different partners. And then last, but certainly not least, Dr. Robin Lemaire with Virginia Tech Center for Public Administration and Policy, and many of you who've been involved in the Community Foundation's various collaborative networks will know Robin well. She's a scholar in particular of these kinds of collaborative networks and has been involved with First Steps, Thrive, our food assistance network, also involved with Focus. Pretty much anything we can get her involved with, we ask her to be part of. And so her perspective is not only as a participant in all of this great work, but also as somebody who studies these as part of her own scholarship. So a lot of great perspectives this morning. So just real quick, Ashley, if you could jump to the next slide. If you would, just please mute your mic if you're not speaking. That makes it easier for everybody to hear, and particularly for the recording later on. And then we will have a chance to have some open discussion, but if you have a particular question, go ahead and pop it in the chat. I'll monitor that, and that way we can just make sure that we're asking those questions at the right times throughout. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Many of you have already met, hopefully, Ashley Agee, the Director of Communications and Outreach for the Foundation. And she is going to moderate the discussion, and we'll go from there. So I'll turn it over to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Jess. And thanks, everyone, for being here this morning. And so what I have here is just some questions to ask you guys. And so what I'll do is I'll ask the first question, and we'll see who wants to jump in and answer first. If not, then I can call someone to start. But the first question that we have, I think, is a really great one. And that is, how have you collaborated with other organizations during the pandemic? And were these collaborations pre-existing, or did they come out of the pandemic? Tina, do you want to start? I see you first.
So yeah, I have definitely collaborated with many organizations. As Jess stated, I have been in this field for a lot of years, but took on a new position during COVID, which is always fun, with Child Care Aware Western Virginia. So I have had to expand my collaborations even further southwest. So a lot of the collaborations were pre-existing. but I see a deepening of several, particularly around mental health, as we are supporting early educators in their mental health, as well as working with families and children in mental health. So we certainly have deepened that collaboration, and expanded outside of the state with that. So drawing on colleagues that I knew from graduate school that are particularly astute in that area and has done a lot of work. So drew them into the conversations. And also, I think on advocacy, that's been another place that, again, I've seen deeper collaborations and relationships forming with Virginia Voices, really looking towards funding and advocacy throughout this, as well as with BDOE. And they have done a great job of pulling together a group for listening sessions such as these. Again, early on in the pandemic, they were very frequent. Now we're all kind of, pacing ourselves a little bit more as we're in this, with no end in sight, but they pulled together a group about virtual learning. So there was definitely some that have been pre-existing, but some new names that have come to the table and continued the work. So.
Thank you.
Be happy to go next, Ashley.
Okay, thanks.
Most of the collaborative groups that I've been involved in were prior to COVID, but just as Kim mentioned, due to responding to some of the needs that arose very quickly during the pandemic, those relationships were strengthened, and really the response expanded to the population that our agency is typically working with, which of course is the older adult population and often adults with disabilities. But three really rise to the top in terms of those that we've worked with most closely during the pandemic, and that is the Nrb Thrive Program, of course. And that is primarily through the Millstone Kitchen and the grant that was funded to help, put meals out into the community, to help small businesses. So our older adults really did and have continued to benefit from that relationship. And then also just the food directory that was put together even prior to, but that has also been expanded during COVID, has been a wonderful asset to our information assistance team to help folks that are calling in for more resources. The focus group in Giles, of course, has been around for quite a while, but I think my involvement with that also has increased a lot. And I guess, Jeff, you could speak to this. I know when you talk to the group, but I believe the subgroup, if you want to call it that, in terms of a response to direct needs within Giles County because of the pandemic, also are helpful. We've been doing cross referrals as your team has come in contact with older adults and families that have needed our support in some way. And then your team has been very responsive in helping us to get some meals and some supplies out if we've been shorthanded with some of our drivers. So that has been a super response during the pandemic. And then also, many of you might be familiar with our programs with Staples for Seniors, which is kind of like the backpack, Micah's backpack program that responds to weekend meal needs, and also to our Fido's Pantry that help older adults with their pet foods. So the awareness of that program and even the needs that we have within that has been heightened, in the response to the communities, not just in Giles, but throughout the New River Valley, I think has really bumped up a lot. And then last is our Aging in Place Leadership Team group. And while in terms of concrete things that have been happening in response to the pandemic, maybe not so much, but I do think that there has been a heightened awareness about the issues of social isolation with older adults. We all knew it was there prior to, but I think after experiencing it very personally at any age, that we can all appreciate more the challenges that older adults face. So having those collaborations before the pandemic, I think were very helpful to, as we went into it, to have that relationship already built, but then also to see where the needs are and to help strengthen those relationships and expand to respond to those needs.
I would be happy to go next should that be the desire.
Go for it.
Okay. I would start by saying that we were fortunate with Focus that we already had established relationships with a huge number of many of you on the screen here today. And that allowed us to respond, I think, quite rapidly to situations that occurred. Tina mentioned the situation with Agency on Aging. We had our senior check program that we established in Giles to take care of those who were the most vulnerable in the COVID period that we're in, and that, as a matter of, I think, just logical extension, we increased the collaboration with the agency and Tina and Shannon. I see Shannon's on there as well. That the whole group, it was logical. It expanded. It was just so fluid in the response that we were able to deal with issues that came up quite rapidly. Some of the issues weren't necessarily just related to perhaps food insecurity or something of that type. They were related to other issues like obtaining medications or perhaps even a leaky roof. So with the network members that were out there, I think that the expansion truly occurred with the Agency on Aging, and Tina's group did a tremendous job in addressing the needs of that population here in Giles. One of the other things, just because of the network and the established relationships, we needed to set up childcare that was beyond what the capacity had been prior to COVID coming in, just because of the way school schedules and everything else played out. So we were able to speak with various network members and assist, being county government, assist some of those in the process of permitting and health inspections and working with DSS, all those things that play into it. Some of you, like Kim and others, are much better versed in what's required, but we were able to push some buttons and help facilitate that, just because the network was already set up and already in place. But I think that the key is the networks were there. I think there is some level of difficulty in establishing new relationships with COVID as a function of just establishing personal trust between different organizations, but as well as organizational trust. I think that in many respects takes time. And I think COVID has made it a little more difficult, but as we become, I think, more comfortable with this type of meeting here, I'm looking at the screen and I see everybody's faces, as you all do. As we become more comfortable with this, I think that will diminish over the course of time, and we'll be able to establish those trusts that are so necessary to a good functioning network. Those are my thoughts.
Well, I'll finish this out, and I'll actually do that by disagreeing slightly with Jeff. So, and just for those who are coming in, I'm Robin Lemaire, I'm associate professor at Virginia Tech. So, and my expertise is as a researcher is studying these types of collaborative relationships. So I'm coming at this more as from what I've seen from the research that we've done. So though I agree, Jeff, that there's the need for, COVID makes it harder with trust. I have also witnessed, we have studied a statewide network that emerged from COVID. So I think at times that might be the case with the need for trust slowly building. But I would say that I think under other conditions that can speed up the process. So I will say that most of the networks we've seen were pre-existing already. There's a difference. Just because a relationship is pre-existing doesn't mean they're all the same. So we've actually witnessed how the deeper relationships actually led to being more responsive, right? Being ready to move quicker. So I think in general, there was a deepening of relationships or the recognition like, oh, we need this information. And so we've really seen organizations come together at least to get that information sharing. But I've also seen where networks weren't able to pivot as fastly just because the relationships weren't there yet. Like Jeff said, the trust and the being used to working together wasn't quite there. So even though they were trying to respond, they weren't able to respond as well as they could have if they'd been working together for longer. So I do think it's important to have those pre-existing relationships. They can really help with responding. But as I said, we've also witnessed a network that grew out of the need. It was not a nonprofit network. It's with local government finance because of the dire situation that these agencies were facing. Someone brought them together just so they could share with one another, learn from one another how to deal with this crisis. And it was supposed to be a temporary thing. And it met such a need that it's become a permanent thing. So even though they've really kind of come through part of the crisis from that perspective, not completely, but with dealing with some of the initial elements, they still found the value of connecting and sharing. And so what's interesting is these relationships that didn't exist before will likely continue on, become a permanent thing because they found not just the need to collaborate in response to the crisis, but the value of collaborating that they get regardless, right? They found so much value from it, which kind of sets up for the next question. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. And I was going to say, some of you kind of touched on this next question already, but that's okay. So the next question that we have is, how has collaboration with other organizations helped your organizations to navigate during the pandemic? Kim, do you want to start again?
So I think for Child Care Aware, one of the things that we've really seen is, again, continuing on with those collaborations, that as we were really trying to collect data and be agent for opening and closing, childcare that was open at the time or closed, but then and have that information readily available for parents who are seeking early care and education. We did again see some deepening of those collaborations, but also we had to kind of rely on them further. So we had to get out more information to our pre-existing network about those services that we do provide and how we can support the families in the community at large. And so I think one of the things that really, again, helped us navigate that was relying on those kind of core networks or contacts, but then being persistent with it. So a lot of information sharing. An example of that would be working with the superintendents throughout Western Virginia to just let them know about our resource and referral for parents as schools were starting to navigate and plan for their opening this fall, and the scheduling that is very many and varied over the state, but particularly here in Western Virginia. So I think that those collaborations, again, have just been key in the underlying work that, you know, is set before Child Care Aware around that resource and referral, and the communication that's needed to pull together that data for families and communities that we're trying to address the child care shortage.
Thank you.
Okay, second. Well, overall, just that with our collaborative networks, it helped us to get information out more quickly in terms of how the pandemic had affected or has affected our older adults in the community and what some of the needs are. And as a result of that, I've already mentioned a little bit of that prior, but really helping link us more quickly to some needed food resources, even looking at some monetary assistance, and then definitely helping address the social isolation in some areas, linking us to more volunteers to help with our increased packing of supplies and food for our clients. And in some cases, even helping us with the delivery of meals when we had the need to follow along with the drivers that would ordinarily be delivering meals. And then certainly getting out into our more remote areas of the New River Valley. So just really helping us to pivot very quickly, to respond to the need and to fill in a lot of gaps.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maria Mcpherson. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm the Director of Adoption Services with DePaul Community Resources. And it was an interesting, there was a coinciding of of COVID and the movement to remote work with us starting 2 brand new grants with the state where they've developed a consortium system for delivery of post-adoption services that involves multiple sectors, including the court system, mental health, DSS offices, basically, you know, school systems, any of those providers who kind of touch the lives of adoptive families. And we had to mobilize consortiums in the Western and the Piedmont regions where we are the lead agent for those regions following COVID. So I would say that our previous collaborative connections through various coalitions and just other services we provide were tremendously helpful in, you know, getting those consortium systems set up and established. We meet on a quarterly basis to kind of oversee and refine post-adoption services in those regions. And we've had really an exciting and high level of engagement across multiple service sectors. So I would say that those previous collaborative relationships were key to making that happen, that if we had not had those in place ahead of time, we would have really struggled probably to get that off the ground, you know, at that time.
Okay, thank you. All right, Jeff, you want to go?
Would echo much of what has been said here. We're very fortunate in the NRV that there are so many individuals and organizations who do work together, enjoy it, and do so effectively. And that was such a key piece to being able to be responsive. As we entered March, we were basically acting in a play where the script was being written as we went along. We had no idea what the medical issues were, what the scientific parameters were. We were just kind of responding as things went along, and that network and those organizations enabled us to be responsive and appropriately responsive to all that occurred. And I would just say that we're fortunate that we did have these highly functional networks. in place so we could be responsive. That's my piece.
Well, I won't spend much time on this because I think we've all hit on it, and I think a lot of the questions are really going forward with thinking about virtual. But I will just reiterate, I think the easiest, the most obvious way organizations benefit is the information sharing, learning. How do we do this together? Like, how are you handling this? How can I? What can I learn from that? Or what resources are out there that I may not be aware of? But I do think, as like Maria, said, and Jeff said, as well as Tina, all of everyone, that there's even, some benefit realizing new ways of doing things, new ways of working together too. So I think we see more of the benefits at the information sharing level, because that's kind of that first entryway, the first benefit you see. But I do think there's great examples of how when you have been working together, how you can quickly mobilize and rethink how you can work together to address the challenge, or solve maybe a problem that there existed, right, but we were forced to find a new way to actually address it this time, or finding a new way to to a new problem that we had to address.
Thank you. So a lot of what we've talked about so far is how you've collaborated and how that's, benefited your organization. And as we sit here on a Zoom call today in October, a lot of us had never even heard about Zoom, in February. And so in March, a lot of that had to change. And so let's talk a little bit about challenges. So what are the biggest challenges to collaborating that you guys have had? And, what have you had to do to overcome and sustain as you shifted to a virtual setting?
So I guess I'll go first. So I think, initially I spent a lot of time on that technology piece. A lot of the clients I work with, Zoom was not their friend, hadn't heard of it, they'll just say, I don't use my computer very often. So spent a lot of time navigating Zoom via their computer. Even yesterday, I spent about 20 minutes prior to a training session with a provider that was in a panic because she had never used Zoom before, still at this point. So helping her download it, those kinds of things. So I think that was one of the initial things that we all dealt with, was just being comfortable with the technology piece. And then, of course, as a professional development specialist, that's another piece that we have also, we've had to work through, is how to take an in-person training and put it into a virtual world, and keep folks as we see a little something going on there, keep folks engaged throughout that training session. So those are things that I think have been, on the technology side, hurdles. I think there'll be benefits, so we can talk about that as we go forward. I also, think that the challenge has, one of the other challenges was just the flow of work schedules and availability as folks are working from home and with their children. So, it's definitely been a space of grace. And in some ways, it's been really fun to kind of get to see people's, more intimate settings, but some challenges that I think are even more prevalent than before.
Well, I think for me, at least in the beginning, just the technical issues that can arise using a virtual platform. And I probably should say user issues as well, just getting used to the use of not just Zoom, but some other virtual platforms that we've used. And then when I've worked from home, unfortunately, I live in a rural area in Pulaski County. And even though I have cable and internet, sometimes the connection isn't so great. So that's been a challenge. But really, I have found that Zoom fatigue is a real phenomenon for me anyway. And I've thought about that and why that is. And I think it just takes a much more concentrated effort in having meetings by Zoom, at least for me, to stay focused and to really concentrate. And so I think with multiple Zoom meetings, which I'm very grateful that there is that option, I have found that it has been very draining and have had to work a little bit harder to find ways to keep myself more engaged in the meetings, and then try to pace myself. There's that temptation because it is so easy to set up a Zoom meeting, and there's so many aspects to it that are positive, not to overdo it, and learn how to really going into a Zoom meeting, what is the goal of it? What is my goal coming out of it? And trying to stay focused on that. So that's been my challenge.
Hi, I'm Melissa Blau. I'm the regional coordinator for post-adoption services with DePaul. I work under Maria. And I just wanted to chime in really quickly and say, one of the biggest challenges I've seen as a service provider is that as much as we as professionals can collaborate, the people we serve are experiencing Zoom fatigue. And so, all of the relationships, all of the services, all of the resources that we can gather working collaboratively, it's just a struggle to engage the people that we do this work for. So that was all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, in terms of, I think where we've seen the biggest challenges, I'd say our agency overall did a really good job with a pretty quick pivot regarding the use of technology and move to remote work. But certain aspects of programming are much more difficult to deliver remotely than others, especially support groups. And we have respite programming for families to give them relief from time with their kids. And, we're trying to think of really creative ways of continuing to support families, help them de-stress, help them, relax and engage in meaningful ways without having group activities, where we bring them together in person. And that has been very challenging to keep them, engaged and feeling the same level of benefit. We certainly are offering a lot of different options for online support groups, and we're doing all kinds of individual outreach and trying to think outside the box in terms of sending packages for activities, but it is, I would say that piece of our programming is hard to reset and redesign in this current environment and to keep everyone safe. And so it's an ongoing challenge for us.
Okay, Jeff Dinger here. I would start with saying that one of my personal challenges is to not beat myself up over the fact that back in February, I did not buy 100 shares of Zoom stock. What was I thinking? It's done quite well. I think that on the, probably the largest challenge I think for us as well was the technology, both in setting up so that we could use the technology effectively, but also I think becoming more comfortable with the technology. Many of you know that we hold our focus meetings in a large meeting room here in the county, and we are able to, because of the size of the room and the layout, we're able to distance, have effective physical distance, but the difficulty with the technology was ongoing. It got better and better and better until finally we decided that we'd move the meeting to an all virtual meeting. And I think that we're at the point now where folks are largely comfortable one of the other challenges, I think, initially was, again, comfort levels with Zoom or Google Meets or WebEx or whatever platform you used, was the fact that it was so much more difficult to be, I think, spontaneous. In a meeting setting, it's pretty easy with folks who work together and have worked together to be more spontaneous, and ideas just pop out and pop out and pop out. It's difficult in this format with Zoom to be spontaneous, and I hope it doesn't stifle input. I think we're becoming more adept at it, but I know that at one point initially it probably did stifle that spontaneity. And the last thing I would add is, for those who are familiar with the focus communities that we work with. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, anyone who wishes to attend focus meetings, just send me an email, jdinger@gilescounty.org, and I'll be delighted to have you on the list, and you're more than welcome. Everybody's welcome. Getting back to what I was starting to say, we have identified or had 6 years ago now, certain communities within the county that are low income communities where reactive services were expended, the majority of in the county. And we would go into these communities and actually go door to door and meet the residents and establish a presence and over time establish trust with the residents and learn what root causes there were that were the issues for them that were causing the poverty and all the other social issues that go along with that. That has been largely just put on hold. We began expanding into a new focus community in the town of Pembroke this past January, February, and Robin and her team were intimately involved with that. And when COVID hit, that just came to a grinding halt. So that is a challenge, and I don't know how we can do that, because without establishing the trust with those residents, we can't learn of the issues that they're dealing with and help them to attain the services that would help them rise out of their situation. So I think that's, the other thing I wanted to add relative to comfort with the technology. We just started this past week the new community health needs assessment with the Carillion team and all those others. And I think that went quite well via WebEx, which is what that one was on. So I think there is a comfort level that's happening. I just hope we're able to be as spontaneous as we could be, perhaps in a less, not structured, what's the word I want? Just a less electronic format, more organic format. That's it.
Well, I would say, I will first start off too and say that Zoom wasn't new for a lot at Virginia Tech and for teaching cross location. So I have to admit that it was fun watching everyone learn to deal with Zoom, as we've seen from like all the memes and things. You know, how many times, you know, you have to still say, hey, you're muted, right? So it was fun, you know, and I think it was nice to have that with everyone just struggling together and learning. So I was just going to reinforce, you know, a couple points, but add a new point. I completely agree with Tina. Zoom fatigue is an issue that needs to be recognized. I think it's also because you don't have to travel to meetings, which we can talk about as actually as a benefit of the virtual, but at the same time means people overbook themselves, right? You go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and you don't have that downtime between those meetings that you might have if you're traveling, you know, or even walking down the hall for a new meeting, right? And I agree with Jeff that what we lose is those impromptu side conversations, right? I think that is the hardest challenge of the virtual. I will say, you know, we'll talk about that next, but I think there's some benefits I can talk about too. But I do think we lose those impromptu conversations. So trying to find ways to allow that to happen in the virtual setting is important to address. The one additional point I would add is I think, the challenge that people have had to really learn is with structure. You don't realize it, but when you walk into a room, there's a lot of signals that we're just trained to pick up on, right? About, what's this meeting like? What's my role? How am I expected to participate? How can I participate? And we don't have those signals with Zoom. And so I think I've seen how everyone, Jess and Jeff, I know in facilitating meetings, I've seen how they've learned that they have to play a more, a stronger facilitating role, because you have to have someone help that conversation, knowing when, because, people are afraid to speak up or don't know when to speak up, all the hesitation, knowing when they can, how they should, whether it's chat and voice. So it's been interesting to see how people have learned the need to facilitate the conversations much more than happens in person, because we have those in-person signals we're used to having when we're physically together, right? So that's just the one element I would add to it.
Thank you. And I think there are some questions in the chat box. So we're going to take a quick.
Yeah.
Just
So sure. Yeah. So there's a couple that have come up. So one from Melissa about what networking and outreach strategies have you found most helpful in developing new relationships and partnerships in a virtual world? So for those who have kind of developed those new relationships, how did that work? What strategies did you use? And did you reach out, or did they kind of happen organically? And anyone can chime in of our panelists.
So can I chime in, though? It was linked to comments that I had prepared for another question. But I've actually, like I said, I've been researching these interactions, and I would like to point out that I think chat is a very valuable benefit of these Zoom meetings. And I've been amazed to see the relationships that come about through chat. In fact, because I think a lot of people will be more hesitant to speak up during a group, right? Whereas the chat feature has really allowed people to engage with one another without it being the primary, like everyone else is focused on that. So I've actually seen where people are connecting via chat in that, oh, that is so interesting. Can you share more information with me about that? And they exchange emails or contact information. And I would, hypothesize that that's leading to new relationships. So I think if you find a platform, Zoom platform, in which you can engage, even, whether it's if personal chat's allowed, but really trying to connect specifically with people that might have that information. I do think that that's been a benefit of the Zoom platform for people.
Other strategies, Jeff or Tina or Kim, that have been helpful for new relationships?
Well, clearly, Robin's pointed out I need to be better at chat. I've never professed to be a great technologist. I've apologized for it in the past, but as I go through all this kicking and screaming, I have to pay more attention to using chat, and I will do it, Robin. I promise. I won't let you down.
That's okay. You're facilitating meetings. It's hard to do it, but it's when you're facilitating. While you're facilitating, I've seen people engage with each other. So you're doing a great job.
All right.
Well, another question too that Laura asked in the chat is, have any of you started new projects during COVID, and would you feel comfortable enough with your collaborations to start new projects right now? And it seems like some, I'm not sure, Jeff, for example, if like the senior check-in existed in some form beforehand, but that might be a new project, and others can chime in. So any new projects? Jeff, go ahead.
Well, Senior Check most certainly did not exist pre-COVID. So we did begin that in tremendous collaboration. I mentioned earlier on Tina and her crew and and expanding the interaction with the folks at DSS and just a number of different organizations. The other piece we did that in response to COVID is we started a gift card program for our restaurants and our lodging in Giles that was able to raise 130, I think it was $6,000 that went back to the restaurants immediately within a matter of days from the time that people bought their gift cards. So that was a great collaboration within our business community and helped those folks and their workers, importantly, to stay on payrolls and to, I guess, ride the wave, if you will, of COVID until they could start opening up again. So those were two new things.
Well, within the Agency on Aging, as a result of our collaborations and our ability to access more food, supplies, and various products, we weekly for a while started ramping up what we were getting out to our clients who were getting home delivered meals. And now we've gone to something we call Super Wednesdays monthly, where we look at paper supplies, our shelf-stable food, fresh produce, just all the various products that we've been able to gather through our connections with others to get out to our folks throughout the New River Valley. It's gone from about 200 people to about 400 people within the last few months. And also utilizing more volunteers to help us get that done. So I would say that's definitely something new that has arisen out of the pandemic and with our collaboration.
I think that in some ways our current circumstances have allowed for some new internal projects, or made them more feasible than they would have been otherwise. Right now, agency-wide, we have work focusing on racial equity issues, both within staffing and in the populations we serve. And we have an outside consultant providing some expert training for all of our staff in different kind of layers. And because we're an agency that's spread out very widely geographically, we're in a lot of different localities and have a pretty large staff population. It's provided the fluidity to do that with all different groups, kind of from the leadership level down, and have a lot of mobility in providing those trainings and conversations. Similarly, we've had a lot of different work groups formed dedicated to oversight of different things, or just reconfiguration of leadership and different initiatives within the agency. And I think that the circumstances have provided a platform that have allowed us to do that in a really effective way.
Thank you. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and so I want to be sure that we have time to open it up for questions. But if the panelists have any other notes that they had prepared that they want to share before we do that, I'll open it up. I know, Robin, you had wrote things down.
Well, I just wanted to hit on, I don't want it to end too negatively, and it's kind of, I think, with Maria's comments, the benefits that exist from the virtual platform as well. I thought it would be really important to hit on that. I mentioned chat, but I also seen relationships develop geographically that probably wouldn't have otherwise. And so I think that's very important too. I know people have even said it's kind of easier to engage because I don't have the transportation time as well, but we also tend to share with those that are around us. And the virtual platform has really allowed us the opportunity to share with, develop relationships with those that just serendipitously wouldn't have happened. And I think could be very important for all of us. And again, like I said, with the chat, I think in some ways it's changed if you, would go to conferences or things like that, there is that, kind of, elite the speakers and you just were expected to listen. I've seen where those relationships have kind of changed. Those that normally weren't the ones who, were the ones that were supposed to be just the recipients. The Zoom has kind of leveled the platform and they can be the ones that others are learning from. So I just want to reiterate that I think that in the way, I don't want us to focus too much on the negatives of the virtual sphere, and that I think there's also a lot of benefits that we can use and maybe should maintain going forward, once we are hopefully able to resume to more in-person activity.
And I didn't get around to asking this question, but one of the things that I was going to ask is how do you stay engaged with your colleagues? And I know one of the things that we do at the foundation is on Friday mornings, the three of us just jump on a Zoom call, no work talk. We just talk about what's going on, how's life, how's family. And it's just really nice to have that time to, have that small talk that you don't get because you're not in an office setting right now. And I think that's been really beneficial. I started in March at the foundation. And so I've been virtual the whole time. And so I think it's been really great to get to know Jess and Laura. And so I don't know that everybody has the ability to do that, but I'm speaking on behalf of Jess and Laura. But I think that's really nice to have that downtime to chat with your colleagues too.
Ashley, if I could echo something that Robin said, there definitely are positive aspects that have come out of this. I think if we think back to that period of time in our lives that was BC, before COVID, we all remember that? I doubt that there's anyone on here today who would have said back then, gosh, I wish I had more meetings to go to, right? Sometimes it was to the point where, okay, when do I get my work done when we're in meetings? When do I respond to the needs? So I think that we certainly have less travel time than we had back then. We may not be able to decompress as readily if the Zoom meetings are one after another, but I think that's certainly helped, just relative to travel time. I know that a lot of the telehealth and a lot of the medical community, I know the CHIP program, they talk about how they have far less no-shows. We all know that transportation for our target audience, our clients, has always been an issue, especially in our rural areas. And so there is not the travel time involved any longer. And if those individuals do have adequate internet, the Zoom meetings and those other formats tend to have been very successful. So we've seen better penetration into the target audience in a lot of respects. Now, of course, it was mentioned earlier, we do have to be cautious about Zoom fatigue. That's a very real deal. So it's a compromise. It's up to us to balance those things, I think, to a great extent. But there are positives. And one thing that I wanted to touch on, Kim, you mentioned earlier, used the word the intimacy of some of these Zoom things. Now, I just saw Robin's cat go by. That's very human. And I saw another cat earlier. I haven't seen any dogs yet. We have dog people. Was it you, Lorraine?
Mine's down underneath my feet.
Okay, we got some dogs. Okay, so
It was my cat. I've got a few here.
Well, and I think to piggyback on that, one of the benefits that we're seeing just from a funding standpoint in both in Child Care Aware, but also in other nonprofits that I serve on boards for, is that we're able to shift some funding because we are saving money on travel time and that kind of thing. And it allows us to be more intentional. And if you guys ever work with me, you know, I'm all about some intentionality in the services I provide. And it has allowed us to shift funding to be more intentional with the services or the materials that we're providing educators, and making it more cost effective for them. So even same with Zoom fatigue, we're at a height of professional development fatigue. Like the market has saturated with free online professional development. So we have started new projects, really taking what we've got there and pulling in a set team to really think about how to shift that to make it more meaningful and more intentional, so that it is not just, you know, the one and done workshops or whatever. But the funding has, I think, is one of the things that may come out of this, may have to come out of it, because we're going to see tighter budgets in FY22. But it also has allowed us, even in the interim, to kind of really shift funding to make it more intentionally. I mean, I don't have a travel budget, you know, at all right now. So that has been interesting. At, you know, our BASE state conference, we've shifted funding just miraculously because the cost of the conference center is not there. You know, those kinds of things have been true benefits. Connectivity to others. I've worked virtually or remotely since I've been in Virginia. So you guys are looking at my office. I'm rarely here, which has been the biggest shift. But, you know, I think it is about those personal connections. So I was really glad to hear Ashley's, you know, words of wisdoms there. And it's something that I still rely heavily on. Is I'm really old school in the fact that I'll pick up the phone and call. I'm certainly not an extrovert, but I do value connectivity and individual connectivity. So, you know, I would rather call you than email or Zoom if I've got something to really talk deeply about. So I think that's one of the things that it's that work-life balance, as Robin was saying. I think we do get Zoom fatigue, and in trying to manage our life within our virtual world is new, but there are some great benefits that I think will come out of it. I don't think we will see as much in-person professional development going forward. We're all trying to make that change. And even if we do have it in person, we will always have to have this web-based platform available. And there's some good and bad to that, but I'm going to lean towards the positive of it, that we can, with time, figure out that individual intentionality, that we can connect with individuals, meet them where they're at.
One benefit our agency has seen in terms of reaching clients has particularly been in our clinical arm, because with the movement to more telehealth and using the virtual platforms, we've always had certain regions where we were saturated with referrals, and our therapists who sometimes are the only ones, for instance, in far Southwest Virginia or some pockets of, you know, and the Nrb, we have therapists who are they have special adoption competencies and some other certifications that some providers don't. And so they would fill up very quickly and couldn't serve, you know, all the referrals we would receive. But now we have the geographic flexibility. If one therapist is full in an area, they can actually serve families in another region. And that's been tremendous in being able to meet the needs of families across the regions that we serve. And I think we're definitely going to keep that as a practice where appropriate. Obviously, with young children or people with certain needs, the in-person therapy is just more engaging and effective for certain individuals. But that's a real benefit we've seen, and I think something that we'll continue to build on so that we can serve more clients more effectively.
Well, I appreciate you guys and being so engaged today. Our time of 9 o'clock here, and I want to respect everyone's days. I just had one more quick slide here that I was going to show, just with some next steps. So as just mentioned, this call is recorded. So if you want to share it with anybody, it will be posted on our website later. It's also, you'll find all of our previous calls on our website if you want to go back and listen. Our next call is going to be on November the 19th at 8 a.m. and that's going to be on end of year giving appeal. We have started our nonprofit Feature Fridays. And so if you have not already submitted your organization to be featured on our social media, we would encourage you to fill out our Google form and get featured on our website. And as always, we want to hear how you're doing. So we have our COVID-19 check-in that is always live. So if you want to provide an update on how you're doing, that helps us, design these topics that we have for our nonprofit listening sessions. So thank you guys for being on here today, and we will see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good seeing everybody.